back to the Integrate Intelligently podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Brickler. Again, accompanied today by my brother and CEO and founder of CAD Talk, Scott Brickler. Today we have episode 23. So we now are one of the elite few who have made more than 22 podcasts. Episode 23. Today's title is, when should we integrate CAD, PDM, and PLM with the ERP? Should we start with a new ERP system or should we wait for a phase 2? So Scott, this is a good topic because we often have this topic, especially with our partners when we're selling with a new ERP. Mm-hmm. So before we get going, what are your thoughts, on this, common misconceptions people have, or, since you built, you were the first to build something, right? You didn't have it on new ERP implementation. So of course, when you were doing it, you could tailor it more towards what you needed. So tell me, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic. Obviously we could be self-serving and say like the earlier the better, always, those types of things, like, which is what we want to do, which we actually do advise. But I think that I guess there's two things when you're looking at ERP implementations is that I think we were talking about this yesterday with Kevin, or the other day with Kevin in the last episode, which was that people try to often take on too many things, right? They have big eyes, like their eyes are, their stomach, their eyes are bigger than your stomach type thing. They take on a big part of the project. So I think it's one of those things where you end up cutting features as you go in order to get something up and running. Right. And so it's like, I can see I can see the argument for a lot of people. It's like, well, CAD Talk is kind of like this thing that, is kind of a nice to have, or it could streamline things, or a CAD integration is nice to have because it can streamline things. But it's not. I mean, we can still do it manually without it and things like that. And it's not a huge push. Just like scheduling. Scheduling is you got to have a lot of things in place before you can do scheduling in ERP. That's why people are like, I think Kevin was making the example of like everybody wants to go to scheduling because that's where all the chocolate is, and
right.
It's where all the benefit is. But I guess I could make an argument. I guess I could turn that around and say let's make an argument for why that it isn't the same, right? It would be this. Right. That's great. That's a good point. Is saying yes, maybe it's an extra thing that we have to learn and implement and stuff like that. But what's the downside of that argument? And I think it really has to do with like that.
So we should back up a little bit before we get too far. I was thinking basically that there are two scenarios that we typically see when people want to do integrations, whether they're using CAD Talk or not, right? Integrations can happen with the ERP systems in kind of one of two different time periods. Either A, when you get a new ERP, right, you're going to take on some new integrations, and because you're doing a whole new system, perfect opportunity to finally integrate things that you've never integrated before. And then the second option is to do it after the fact, either after the ERP implementation is finished or at a phase 2 or 3 or later date. And I think the purpose of this conversation is to really talk about why you and I, and some of them, I would say those of us who have been on the projects, both would advise for the former rather than latter. We'd advise for doing it at the start of a new ERP project. So sorry, Scott, I just want to get that in there, make sure it was kind of clear what we were talking about. So kind of two scenarios here, either during it, if you're starting a new ERP project, should you take on integrations or should you kick that can down the road to phase 2 or 3?
Yeah, I think that the fundamental difference would be, because I would actually advocate that some things aren't worth doing right away, right? Like some types of integrations or some types of scheduling or or advanced things that you do in ERP implementation would be worth doing on your first pass. But I would say that things that contribute to the quality of the data are actually a good place, would be a thing that I wouldn't want to necessarily forego, because every day that you don't put good data in, every day that data that you're getting less value out of the system which you're implementing. So, and CAD Talk is one of those things. It's like if we can automate the process of getting the engineering data into the ERP, which is used as the foundation for a lot of these other kind of sexy tools in the ERP, like scheduling, MRP, all of that. That's kind of like the foundational data. So it's like if I could make that tool, like if you want to use a house analogy, if I could just build that foundation a little bit better, then everything built on top of it's going to be so much more straight, and your walls are going to be straight and square and all that kind of stuff. Whereas if you kind of go, well, it's a little harder to change that foundation later, you can still do it. Don't get me wrong. You know, if you didn't do it during the implementation, the next best time to do it would be right away, to kind of go down that path. And I think the reason I kind of say that is that there's two of them. One would be to get the data foundation, but the other one would be that the tooling changes your decisions. Okay. So, I mean, we're humans, we've evolved to make tools, right? So, and what I've noticed a lot happening with ERP implementations, even when people buy the tool, like they buy the ERP or they buy the software they're using, the way that software works, so the way that what it can do will guide kind of how you use it. And what I've seen happen a lot is that a lot of times the decisions are being made around capacity or what's easy or what's hard or what's taking this person, what's taking this person longer, what's taking this person shorter, things like that. And those decisions tend to be made kind of like there's a lot of micro optimizations along the way during implementation that sometimes compromises the overall goal of the implementation. So a great example of that I've seen in the past is like, I think we've brought this up a couple of times, is like people doing things with like bills of material to manipulate bills of material to make it easier to cut down the number of jobs in order to make, to have less jobs on the shop floor, because closing jobs is a lot of work. And then I always kind of, this is always the canonical example I bring up, because the whole purpose of having lots of jobs is to have more granular data, to provide more costing information, to give you more information, to basically utilize the ERP more effectively. So you're optimizing for the wrong thing. I'm trying to make it easy so we don't have to close as many jobs, but I'm sacrificing the data from which the ERP runs. So, and then people would debate with me on that, but that's kind of what you're doing, right? You're saying, so you're kind of micro optimizing on this thing, as opposed to saying, well, if it was easy to close jobs, then I would just make the jobs because it would be easier. Then that would give you the most beneficial data. So I think that when I go back to the idea that the tooling shapes your decisions, if you can use tooling that makes something that would have been difficult easy, it then changes the way your decisions about that like that. You say, well, if the tool had made that you're doing child transactions really easy, then I wouldn't have done that decision to change the bills, which then changed everything else, which then compromised how well the planning worked. It compromised how well the scheduling worked. So therefore, by introducing the tool that kind of eliminates that friction point, you tend to sometimes make better decisions.
Yeah, I would say that absolutely, that you also make assumptions, right? Let's say that obviously people, we have a product that integrates, but any type of integration, especially if it's or any type of tool, whether it's an integration like CAD Talk or any type of product, when you don't have that thing there, that tool, and you don't understand the way it works, and you don't understand the assumptions that are made about how and the best practices around that, you'll end up making, as you said, decisions about the ERP, decisions about how you use that ERP. And you'll say, oh, well, we'll handle all of that later with this, whatever it is, whether that's CAD Talk or something else, right? We'll handle it this other way. Not really understanding what you're saying, not really understanding well, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know if that decision to lay or to set up your system in a certain way to do a certain thing is really going to work that well with the tools that you plan to use later, right? You may have to undo a lot of what you had planned, or you're going to stifle a bit of the capabilities of what you could do with this other tool, because now you kind of hamstrung it a little bit. You set it up in a way making assumptions, and maybe they just weren't good assumptions, because not only when you buy a tool are you getting the tool itself, you're getting the expertise of the person who's done 100 projects, who's talked to 500,000 customers about what they're doing in engineering and what's the best way to do a transformation and what's typical success looks like. Because on IT projects, there's a high risk of failure. You want to follow the best guidelines that's been proven to work and provide value over time. You don't want to go off in the wilderness with your own ideas about how you think it should work and later do and go, oh, well, all those things I thought would work a certain way don't work that way.
Absolutely. And I think it's going off that guideline of how early in the process, or how early is the integration affecting the data. So if it's at the end, I don't want to talk about other integrations that would be bad. there's other tools that you could use.
Well, I think about, Scott, one of the things we do is like nesting integrations, like
sure, yeah.
And so like this conversation came up today. Customer was considering CAD Talk and CAD Talk ERP, our integration between, engineering software, CAD, PDM, PLM, and ERP, and then our nesting integrations between nesting softwares like laser nesting softwares or CNC machine nesting softwares and ERP. And they're looking at both. And our point to this discussion, CAD Talk makes more sense. It's on the front end. And I think when we talked to Kevin, it's on the front end. It's about the quality of the data. It's on the front end of the process. So it makes sense to be on the front end. Whereas the nesting integration is really a little bit on the back end, a bit more on the back end, because it's like you're optimizing for material usage. You're, getting correct transactions, getting better inventory. That's something, in my mind at least, is much easier phase 2 or phase 3 than it is phase 1 of an ERP project, because it's not really on the front end. Now, am I wrong about that?
No, that's actually a great analogy. And that makes it seem like we're less biased with it, because it's like that's even one of our other tools, right? So I remember coming up with a solution for the nesting integration back in 2003 when I was in manufacturing. So that solution for how to solve that problem with the nesting integration was something that we did as a phase 2. It was something we did many, many years after we implemented the ERP at the time. And it really was an optimization. It was an optimization over a process that was more cumbersome in the past, right? So now you could make an argument that the data got better by doing this thing, but like the data that you're using, that data getting better didn't produce the systemic, near the amount of systemic effects that the data of the bill of materials would create. So like getting the costing more accurate or getting the material utilization more accurate, optimized or improved the way the system ran, but it wasn't foundational.
It wasn't foundational.
It wasn't foundational like the bill of materials, which drives everything, right? So it's more of, I would say that it's a little bit more of a vitamin than it is like medicine. So we use that analogy.
I was thinking the same thing.
We talk about software. It's like when you're in the software world, you want to create medicine. You don't want to create and use the analogy of like you need medicine, but a vitamin's a nice to have, right? And there's lots of products that are vitamins that sell really well and that you should get. Like everybody should take their vitamins. It's like everybody should take supplements if they need them, right? But medicine is a must. Vitamins are a should have. And I think of nesting integration, albeit like I would consider myself one of the inventors of it, is still one of the is still a really good thing to do, and it gives you better data. But it's a vitamin. I mean, it's a good vitamin, but it's not medicine. And that's the case of, but so I think, you totally could phase 2 a nesting integration, but I wouldn't phase 2 the CAD integration, just because of like how that data is used and how critical it is to have it correct and things like that.
One other thing I would add into that, couple of things, I think 2 things. One is it made no sense to me to buy a new car and then pile all your old garbage from your old car into your new car.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, it made sense to me. So like you buy a new system, right? Shiny new system. It's a bit of harsh, but like one of the reasons your old system probably doesn't work as well is could be advancements in technology, but also could just be like, manual processes, no integrations, less desirable tooling. So here you bought this new thing that has all capabilities with new tooling, new companion softwares like ours or others, right? Other things that hook into it, tie it all together, really optimize, AI engines, all this stuff. And then you're going to go still manually key in, right? You're going to manually key in the data when you have a way to get it from a much better source, the very best source that you can. To me, it didn't make sense. It felt a lot like piling trash into a brand new system. It's like, I don't get it. Shouldn't you, when I get a new car, and I actually got one this year. Actually, was it this year I got 2 new cars because of my car got stolen? But anyway, I got 2 new cars this year. Yeah. But you get a new car, I got a new car, and it's like, for a while, I didn't want my kids in there because I didn't want them to trash it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, but like you really want to, when you have that new system, you want to set it up so that like the way you get the data in there is the cleanest, most valuable thing. Because as I think we mentioned earlier this week in a discussion we had, is the data is the asset. The better that data is, the better that system runs. If you want to leverage AI, And you're like, how are you going to leverage AI? It's all about the data. The better the data, the better the responses you get, the better the analysis you get. If you're hand keying it, how good can you really get? You can get really good, but then you lost all that. You lost all of that efficiencies, right? You now spending huge amounts of labor, annual labor, making sure the data is good. I mean, I think we had one of these analogies of like, I talked about before, accuracy versus
it's
precision or whatever.
Yeah, accuracy. Like it's actually better to be consistent, even if the data is not accurate.
That's it.
It's like,
right.
It's better to be consistently wrong than sporadically right. Especially when it comes to data, because it's much easier to adjust to that, right? And the nice thing about the integration is that it tends to be consistently wrong. It's consistent, and then therefore you can plan and you can do things with it, and that driver is foundational. Like you said, just kind of going back to your analogy with the your example with the nesting, is that the nesting would be an improvement to make the data better, but the data that you're improving in that case is a little bit more downstream, right? It's like a little more downstream. Whereas I think about, like we mentioned this many times, is that bill of material items, vendors, things like that are literally the basis of MRP, material resource planning. That is the basis of an ERP system. All we did was add accounting on top of it. That's all an ERP system is material resource planning with accounting. And if you don't have the items and the bills of material and the vendors and the routings and things like that, you can't do much of anything with the system. So anything that makes that data more correct, you should do. Or more consistent. I would say
more consistent. I was going to say that, more consistent. Yeah, because one of our other discussions was about like, well, what's the value of an integration? What's the value of this? The time savings. Always, the value of the labor savings. And I think you and I both mentioned that, man, in my mind, it is important, but that's really shifting the leverage of the value of that, shifting to that more consistent data. That more consistent data is way more valuable in the long term than that. Don't get me wrong, the labor savings is huge, but we should not underestimate how good the quality data is. That's going to pay dividends as these systems get more and more intelligent, right? More and more AI comes into fashion. The better that data is, the more competitive advantage it's going to give to companies.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that data, because of the fact that data is used so pervasively in the ERP, it makes more sense to do that earlier and to make that an earlier process. But with the nesting, they take that nesting idea down to where the benefits are there. So maybe that's a good thing that people don't understand is like, why would I integrate the nesting, right? Well, you're speeding up the process of transferring requirements from a job. So I'm going to make a job on a laser or some kind of profile cutting machine. I'm going to pass the jobs from the ERP into there. I'm going to pass raw material over there. So that way I'm not like manually keying that data of like how many parts am I making. And you're also trying to figure out how to best utilize costing. You're trying to get the costing data because you're cutting a bunch of parts on a sheet of material and you're wanting to allocate that sheet of material evenly across the parts as well as labor across the parts and basically get a correct costing of those parts and correct transactions that you typically would have to be done manually. A lot of the benefits to that in that environment is around data entry and speed and labor savings of actually getting that data into the system more accurately. But then you also have the improvement of like, I now have a little bit better costing information around that part that I didn't have before. Maybe you might have backflushed the material, which is just allocated like a standard amount or stuff like that. So you get a little bit more, the quality of the data does go up in that situation, but the leverage of that data isn't nearly as high as the leverage of correct bill of material data. So you always think about like, what is leverage? It's like, how much more can you get out of a unit of work or out of a unit of activity, right? So if I correct the bill of material, it affects scheduling, MRP, all these things, right? Like all these aspects of the ERP. If I fix the costing on some raw material, or a few things that are made out of that material and get that job costing down, it's going to help. Don't get me wrong. You're going to have a better idea of that data, but it isn't going to have the same amount of leverage across your organization as the bills of materials will.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's not just, there are other integrations, right? ERP, depending on the size of the company, especially these days, like a lot of companies are consolidating, buying up buying other companies, right? I see this very much. I had a conversation today. I think I didn't have it, but some of our team did. I know they were on the call about this company owns like 60 other companies, and they're bringing. They got 60 different ERPs, or maybe 30 different ERPs, or whatever. They're trying to consolidate all of those companies down to like just a few ERPs. So like, how important it is about getting that data right, getting those processes right. Otherwise, it's going to be very challenging to do that across the board.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And I think it's like, because you really do. I understand a consultant wanting to simplify an implementation. It goes back to what we were talking about with Kevin, right? If like you can take on too much work in the ERP implementation, and everybody, but I think that you've got to really identify where the highest leverage points are, of anything. So you're like, if I could do nothing else but these few things, what would I put my time into to get the highest return, the highest leverage on that time? And that's why we advocate for that so much, is like that foundational data that's used in the system, the GL for the accounting, like your chart of accounts, your like those types of things, how you do your vendor cross-referencing, like these things that are like the basis of the data that goes into the ERP. Getting that right that's your highest leverage thing you can do. And so if an integration can help you do that, and there's other integrations that you can do that would also be good for foundational data, but like anything around that is going to pay huge dividends.
So it sounds like our framework really is around just that, right? Is it foundational to how the ERP works? If it's foundational in terms of quality and consistency of data, definitely something to do on as early as you can take it on. If it's something that's more optimization, like you said, scheduling, or the data has to be in there and the quality has to be really good, that you can kick that can down the road a bit as a way to aspirations. Mm-hmm. But to that end, let's say someone wants to get the new ERP. How do they know? How do they know what to do? Right, because like you said, they can take on too much and then choke, not get the value out of not just CAD talk, but the value out of ERP that they're doing. So what would you recommend there? Like, how should they approach the initial project integration?
I think it's, typically when somebody buys an ERP or they buy anything, right? Any software, they're trying to get a tool to solve a problem, right? And I think what happens is that they have one idea of a problem they're trying to solve, and then they go look for, then they kind of get distracted from that initial core problem with all the bells and whistles they see during the demos and things like that, and they kind of get like, oh, I really want these things, and these things kind of they see the sexy parts and they go, oh man, I really want that, and I didn't know I wanted that. I mean, it's like shopping, right? You go in for pants and you come out with shoes and socks. I mean, you come out with everything, right? So it's the same type of thing like when you're buying software. And so really like before you even shop, like write down like what problem am I trying to solve? And then really understand that. Like say you were actually trying to solve scheduling. That's a common issue with a lot of manufacturers, right? So I can't figure out when I'm going to deliver this thing. Okay. That problem is hard. It's really, really hard, right? And it's very complex, has all these variables. So if I say I want to solve scheduling, how would I do that? Like, well, an ERP can do that. Well, how does it do that? Well, the way it does scheduling is it has to have to figure out like what am I making? And then I have to like, what is it? Where do I get it from? What are the steps to take to make it? How long does it take to make it? Where am I going to buy it? All these different things have to be known. So it can feed that information into some kind of algorithm to then do something that generates a schedule across all of the things that you're doing in your organization. Okay. So if you think about like, well, if in order to solve that problem, there's like 100 problems before that have to be solved, and it has to be correct. And a small difference here, an imperfection here is systemic. It goes all the way down, which makes the scheduling less useful. So I always look at like, what's the primary thing I'm trying to solve, and then back into all the things that have to be correct or have to be in place to make that thing happen. Right. And then make sure you're hitting all of those things as best as you can to increase the likelihood of that outcome that you're looking for, or that problem you're trying to solve. And the reason why we go back to the bill of material and item data, it's like that's true of a lot of the different benefits you get from ERP. Scheduling is just one of them. But if you were just starting with scheduling, you might say that. Now, if you were a distribution center that did a little bit of light manufacturing, I might say something completely different. You might say, you know what, like you really need to optimize on warehouse management. Like the bills, if the bill's a little off, that's fine. You know, you're not doing that a lot. And I would do the opposite advice. So the context really matters. But if you're like, you know, traditional manufacturers, I mean, I probably, you know, who have like job shops or people who make things, scheduling is usually the number one reason people buy ERPs. At least that's been my experience. Like, doesn't mean it's always true. Or they want to get, you know, they want to get like materials planning, which is what it was built for, right? Then the bills of material are critical in that case. That's why we say that. But like, you know, everybody has different flavors of things they need. But but traditional manufacturers, that's usually what we see.
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't omit that like we integrate with a cloud-based PLM too, which is not dissimilar from an ERP in some ways. But I think the same thing applies there, right? Which is like the use cases I hear a lot for PLM, especially a cloud-based PLM, is like it's that master, right? The center of truth, or whatever they call it, the source of truth, and that's perfectly fine way to talk about it. But also, it's like, what, you know, if engineering is a critical piece of that, this thing that you're buying, this PLM, where you're going to house that data, it's going to be a data warehouse for the most important stuff you have, most important thing you have, and you're going to still enter it manually. I don't know. I don't get it, right? What is the?
Yeah.
It's a disconnect for me. We bought this system. We're paying hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars for this system, but now we're gonna cheapen out on how, or we're gonna kick the can down the road on how we get that data in there, right? We're gonna basically not optimize on how we get that stuff in there. It's like buying a really nice car and then putting the cheapest, cruddiest gas you can find in it, right? I'm buying a Ferrari and I'm going to put in like, you know, the lowest grade gas I can find. Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, I was actually thinking about this earlier when we were talking about like, just as a personal thing. It was like, I recently have lost like 65 pounds, right? And for years, everybody's like, well, how'd you do it now? And I'm like, I basically followed the fundamentals, right? I ate less and worked and moved more, right? I mean, these are the fundamentals of which I avoided for many, many years. But I kept trying to find every little fancy widget or special tool to do all the optimizations, because that was fun, right? Like, ooh, let me find this like bulletproof coffee that like, well, you know, to make me, you know, like all this crazy stuff that I tried for years to do it. And I was actually dabbling in the little things that were like on the optimizations on the periphery of the problem. And that's because those things were more interesting, or they're sexier to look at, right? They're more fun. And because the hard thing is getting the fundamentals right. Like, you know, counting your calories, making sure you're doing the right things, you know, moving, do consistent workouts, those things that you get, the consistency of every day in and day out, doing that work that drive. Then once you have that foundation, then you're like, well, I'm really optimizing to be a marathoner. Then those little optimizations and those little things at the end make a lot of sense. Yeah. But the marathon thing looks great. So everybody wants to jump to the marathon, you know, and if you're still 300 pounds and you're running around the marathon, you're going to have issues. Yeah. You know, so you got to kind of get the fundamentals first, like figure out calories and movement, get the weight down, start feeling a little better, move on to the next, and then you can start optimizing for the little things that you want to do. I would use that same analogy with ERP implementations, or, you know, a lot of things kind of work like that.
I think we might discuss this with Steve, but I think these implementations or these projects really reflect like everything else in life, right? Mm-hmm. It's like focus on the fundamentals, focus on the foundational things, do those really well repeatedly.
Yeah.
And if you do those really well repeatedly, you build those good skills, you build that consistency. Again, we talked about consistency over and over, and with the data, CAD talk at least, but like I think it's fundamental, just that consistency, that in that process, everything else will be much easier. And then it's more like a spice, right? It's the 80-20 rule. You can sprinkle on that rest of that stuff later, right? You can add all the other stuff, but until you're doing the basics right, and you're not majoring in the minors. I often will say that, majoring in the minors. I get that a lot. People will be majoring in the minors, like, oh, what about this thing over here? What about that? I'm like, yeah, none of that matters, guys. None of that matters. You think it matters because it's easy to get caught up in that, but it doesn't matter, right? So I think that's the big thing, is like, to your point, focus on the fundamentals, do the fundamentals really well, and then don't stop, right? Once the fundamentals are in place, then you can add on a little bit more. You can add a little more spice, right? You can add a little more of the last 20%.
Absolutely. Perfect. Consistency drives efficiency. That's like, I love that statement, because it's true. It's like, you can go so much faster and do so much more if you're just consistent, and the things that you do, and get the fundamentals down, just like you mentioned. So absolutely, that's a great way to look at it. I think that that's why we say that about, the integrations and things like that, is to drive back to like, what are the fundamentals of an ERP implementation? And that's the core data from which everything else derives. So get those fundamentals down.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one of the last projects that I did from start to scratch was with it wasn't with CAD integration, but was with PLM and with another ERP. And this is a water. This company does water filtration and water treatment, and I helped them get their data into their ERP. Right, so I had a repeatable process that was consistent. It took their data that they had cleansed in this PLM system, and I put it in their ERP through testing and for the go live. And then we set up the automation to transfer out of the PLM into the ERP. But that customer, over the next, I think it's got to be 3 or 4 years now they've been with us, they have continued to work. We've partnered together, continued to enhance it, add more, make changes, make the process even more streamlined. It wasn't just try to do it all at once, right? We got something we got the data in there clean with CAD Talk. We implemented something that got it working, and then we just kept improving it. And they, to this day, right? I really think of them as like I don't think they even know it, a pioneer in this, because it's like they really are moving so very quickly, so much faster than I've ever seen any other manufacturing company with how much they're doing. They release it out of their PLM, and so much is happening behind the scenes. But that didn't come overnight. That did not just happen like, oh, I did a bunch of work and then. In fact, when we went live because we were spending so much time testing and cleaning, getting the data into the system, that when we went live with CAD Talk, it was really pretty basic. But then over the next, however much time, we kept improving that process, kept improving the integration, kept improving things. It just got better and better and better, and it just kept building on it. And so, but we focused on the fundamentals, a process that was going to give us good, clean data in the system that we could leverage, and on a way in which to keep them continuing to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those two concepts of go back to the fundamentals, really nail the basics, and then have a process for continuously improving. This is not a big bang. It's a refinement. Refine. And yeah, if you do that and you approach it that way, and I would think that most implementations would go off without a hitch. I think it's when you get too aggressive, or you start you get focusing on the things, majoring in the minor things, as you said, is where things got to go sideways, because your focus gets split, your effort gets dispersed, and then you just get fatigued and you give up, and you're like, I don't know why anybody does this thing. It's just too much work, or these things don't work. And it's like, or they don't work for us, and it's really just a matter of like, you just didn't give it the consistency and you hit the fundamentals. That's usually why it doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, so many things, I think, these projects, I think we had this conversation with Steve, these projects reflect people, right? Mm-hmm. And to continue to improve, it's small wins, small improvements over time. Small improvements over time always will win out, right? And it's like, on the implementation, get the fundamentals, do them well, get going, get some use and value out of it. Then then continue to improve it. Keep it pushing. If you do that, before you know it, you'll have a system that really is delivering on what you want, the value that you want, whether that's CAD Talk, the ERP, or any software system.
Yep, absolutely. Very well said.
Okay, well, Scott, this was a good conversation. I feel really passionate, not because like I've done demos and I've helped customers and they say, oh, we'll do that in phase 2. I mean, of course that does happen. But I really firmly believe that like getting, leveraging something on the front end, getting a process down, since you're dealing with change management anyway, it's a good time to think about how we're going to get that data in there, how we're going to make it consistent, how we're going to train the staff in this new process so that we're not training them differently a year from now, and making all those changes within, but also keeping it limited, the scope limited, so that we can get wins is really the best approach for customers. But I will say, even if you choose not to do it on a brand new ERP implementation, and you do choose to do it later in a different phase, all is not lost, right? There's still lots you can do, lots of benefits you can get. There may be things that you miss out on. Will they be critical? Maybe not. May it cost you more? It might, because there might be change, or there might be additional configuration that needs to happen, or more complex sort of rule sets. But typically, in my experience, you can still retrofit, still make it work within the process. So in that regard, the best time to do it, right, is when you can. Right, the best time to do it is when you can, and you keep pushing to make an improvement. If that's with a new ERP, by all means, do that. If it's not, it's going to be a little bit later, or even a little later in the project, or the first thing after the project goes live. Those times will fit too. It will be still there, and it still will be valuable at the same time.
Yep. Yeah, it's kind of like investing. The best time to do it was 10 years ago. It's like the best time is right now.
That's it. Yeah, that's exactly right. When's the best time to implement? Now. When's the second best time? Whenever you start it, right? That's the next best time.
Now. Yeah. So it's like, it's like a lot of things, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. I think it's better to get it in, to get that in, and get that consistent right out the gate, even if you don't implement all the features of CAD Talk. That's the other thing people do, is they do get CAD Talk, or they do get integration, then they try to turn on every bell and whistle in that. They go back to that big bang implementation. It's actually better, instead of cutting something. Sometimes it's like, especially when it's foundational, it's better to even get it in place, get it implemented, even if it's not the final implementation, and then improve over time, than it is to try to say, well, we're going to do it. We're going to not do it at all, and then try to implement it later. I mean, it still works. It's just not going to. It's actually a little bit more ideal, because you have momentum. There's like the power of momentum. Like once you have something going, and then just making improvements, you're triggering off of that momentum, as opposed to like, oh, I'm going to ramp back up again and try something new. I'm going to try something else. So you're just continuing on.
Inertia is a real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Scott, this was a great conversation. I feel passionately about this because I want our customers and people to be successful, right, with their projects, with their goals as a companies. Because you and I working on this company and working to improve it and our relationships with customers, and our customers are trying to improve their relationship with their customers and do a good, and improve there. So I'm living this every day, so I'm really passionate about this. So I guess, Scott, in closing, I encourage everybody to continue to subscribe to the CAD Talk podcast. Share it with your friends. Share it with anyone in the manufacturing who work in the ERP, or even in the engineering space, to talk about about integration, about CAD. Leave a comment, right? Have new ideas for us to discuss, questions you have, put them down there in the chat, or down in the comments. We'd love to have new topics. All right, Scott, I guess it's getting late here in the evening, so unless you have anything else, we'll let you go, and till next time.
All right, so next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.